Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Fiddler. I am one of the elders here at City Life Church. And I've got to tell you that having given presentations and talks over Zoom for the last year and a half, when I opened my eyes after praying, I felt like saying to Cindy, how did all these people get in my room? But it's good to be here. Things are kind of getting back to normal, right? Last night we had our over 50s group meeting at the Fiddler Casa, right? If I seem a little tired, it's not my fault. They wouldn't leave. Right? I stayed late. So anyway, no, we had a great time. What's that? Great host. Okay. All right, that's right. That's the sign of a good party is when people don't leave, right? When they're leaving early and they're out of there, that's a hint. But it is good that things are starting to get back to normal. I don't know about y'all. I'm back in the office. It's been kind of hard. It's nice working from home, and all of that. But back in the office, and then Cindy and I got on a plane for the first time in a year and a half. And that was a real step forward for us because I don't know about y'all, but throughout the pandemic, we watched a lot of TV. We binge watched like 12 seasons of Mayday and Air Disasters. Have anybody ever seen these? Okay, they're great. I mean, they're realistic. They're about actual plane crashes. And, it's in all the horrifying detail. The plane going down and people screaming, and then they investigate the accident and tell you what happened, what actually went wrong. And it's stuff like, a mechanic left a piece of duct tape on a sensor, or, the pilot didn't get enough sleep last night, the night before, or there was something wrong with the engine. So while we were watching these, no kidding, I bet probably a dozen times we looked at each other and said, we're never getting on a plane again. This is last summer. Well, finally the time comes. We have to go up. We're going to go up to Indianapolis to visit my folks. We haven't seen them in over a year. And so we get on the plane, and I look behind Cindy's seat, and sitting back there is Eric Gordon. Now, y'all know who Eric Gordon is? Great shooting guard for the Houston Rockets. If you want to know if he's any good, we paid him $17 million last year. Okay, he's a superstar, right? And so he played basketball at Indiana University, and I grew up in Bloomington, and so I started talking to him about Bloomington and Bobby Knight and Kelvin Sampson. We talked some basketball and all that, and we had a really good talk. This is a great way for the trip to get started, And so then I get done talking to him. He's real polite and all, and I start reading on my Kindle, and just relaxing, and then the plane takes off, and as we're climbing, I hear this sound, and it's like a clanking sound coming from the engine, and I'm thinking, you're just overreacting, This is, I'd watched too much TV, whatever. But then the plane kind of levels out, and you've got to get to 35,000 feet, so I know this is not good. And so the pilot comes on, and he says, folks, just wanted to let you know, and he's got this comment, just want to let you know that we got a little problem, mechanical problem with one of the engines. We think it's a sensor. But we're going to head back to the airport in Houston and just get it checked out, okay? Now, I consider myself a mature Christian. I recognize that bad things happen to good people, right? And I'm looking around the cabin, and I'm thinking we're probably all expendable, right? But I'm thinking there's no way the good Lord is going to let this plane go down with the only good shooting guard we have on the Rockets, And sure enough, he must be a Rockets fan because we made it back to the airport. Now, we didn't get to Indianapolis until like 4 o'clock in the morning, but anyway, that has nothing to do with today, but I just want to let you know what my life's been like for the past year and a half. If you are new with us, if you're online, we want to welcome you. This is the way church is done now. We have a hybrid church, In the first century in Rome, the Christians met in the catacombs underneath the city of Rome. In Turkey, Cindy and I went to Turkey about 10 years ago. In Cappadocia, they met in caves. And now we have a hybrid service. We meet in a building and we meet online as well. And that's fine because the church adapts, right? So if you're with us for the first time online or you've been watching online, then welcome. We're glad you're here with us. So if you are new, you may not know that we've been in a series from the book of Ephesians, and we've been going kind of chapter by chapter over the last few weeks, and it's been really interesting. Jay did a great job last week out of Ephesians 4, but if you're new and you're not familiar with the Bible, just to give you a little bit of background, Ephesians was written by a guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul, who used to be a Jewish religious leader. He had a miraculous conversion, and then ended up planting churches. And he ends up writing this letter to a group of Christians in a city called Ephesus. Now, again, if you're new to Christianity, this is no fairy tale. Okay, so even historians, scholars who hate God, don't want to have anything to do with Christianity, acknowledge that this guy, the Apostle Paul, existed. And part of the reason we know this, I mean, Cindy and I, we're talking about going to Italy in September with Ann Munson, if we can get on a plane again. But we're going to go there, and one of the things we're going to see is where Paul is buried. His bones are actually buried under a church in a tomb that says the Apostle Paul. History tells us this church was built. The first churches that preceded the one that's there now was built there because that's where Paul was buried. And then in 2005 or 6, they did some scientific research on it and found out the bones in that tomb are from the 1st or 2nd century. So we're like 95% sure that's where his bones are. Ephesus was a real place. If you remember, if you were here in the first week, I showed you pictures from when Cindy and I went to Ephesus. It's not called Ephesus now. It's called Kusadasi. But they've excavated it. You can walk right down Main Street, see buildings on the left and the right side of the street, just like when Paul was there. So this is not a fairy tale. And this guy, Paul, is writing this letter from prison in Rome. And last week, Jay did a great job of talking about living right and what it means to be renewed in the spirit of your mind and put on the new self, created in the likeness of God. And all of that is a precursor to where we start today, which is in Ephesians 5, verse 1. And it starts like this. It says, "Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children." Now, anytime you see the word therefore, that tells you that there's something that's come before it, statements, arguments, and this is the conclusion. And the divisions of the chapters in the Bible are not inspired by the Holy Spirit necessarily, so maybe this should have been at the end of chapter 4. But fortunately, there's a lot more that follows that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to kind of take off on what Jay talked about last week. So he starts by saying, be imitators of God. Now, when I read that, the first thing I think of, and don't judge me, but I think of Bruce Almighty. Anybody ever seen that movie? Okay, it dates me a little bit. Jim Carrey, he wants to be God. He wants to be like God, and so he meets God, who's played by Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman gives him the power of God for a while, and Jim Carrey messes it all up. Okay, but Paul is not talking about being imitators of God with regard to the power of God, although as charismatics we believe that the gifts of the Spirit are a manifestation of that. But what he's talking about here is he's talking about imitating the character or the person or the image of God in respect to how you behave, how you treat other people. And he says to do so as beloved children. So he's talking to Christians here. And if you're not a Christian, you're watching online, you're here today, maybe you're kicking the tires, this is not necessarily written to you. He's talking to Christians. So if you don't know the Lord, then you need to go back and read Ephesians 2, where he talks about how you get saved, how you become reconciled to God, which is through grace by faith. But here he's talking to Christians, people who have already been redeemed. And he says, as beloved children, he says, walk in love just as Christ also loved and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. And I love what Aisha Darwish wrote. We have our CLC starter blog, and she wrote this Friday with regard to what it means to be children imitating your Father. She says, it's endearing and reassuring that we're instructed to imitate God as dear children. When children imitate someone or something, they may not do it perfectly or precisely, but they do it from their hearts with such sincerity and purity. Imitating God is a mark that we belong to him and we are his dear children. And so that's what Paul's talking about here. You've seen people who look like their father. If you saw my father in his prime and you see me, you'd see I have some of the same mannerisms. I talk kind of the same way. It's because I even subconsciously and consciously imitated him. And that's what you do when you love your father. And then he says, walk in love just as Christ. And so he refers almost immediately to Jesus. And the reason he does is because, as we know, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. We imitate Jesus because Jesus is the earthly manifestation. He shows us what God looks like in the flesh. And so we imitate him. And Jesus, he would walk with the disciples for 3 years, and Philip was one of the disciples, and Philip said, "Show us the Father, Jesus." And Jesus said, "What are you talking about? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." And so we're supposed to imitate Jesus. And so what Paul does, and we're not going to actually read these next 8 verses, I'm going to paraphrase them, but what Paul does then in the next 8 verses is he describes what it's like to imitate Jesus. So here's what he does. In verse 3, or in verse 2, he actually starts by saying, talking about love and sacrifice, how Jesus loved and sacrificed himself for others, implying that if we're going to be like Jesus, that's the way we should be. We should lead with love, be willing to sacrifice for others. And then in verse 3, he says, don't engage in immorality and don't be greedy. Why? Because Jesus didn't engage in immorality. He wasn't greedy. That's not what the image of God looks like. That's not what it looks like to imitate God. And then he says in verse 4, no filthy or sexual talk or coarse jesting should be found among you. Why? Jesus never did that. Have an attitude of thankfulness like Jesus. Verse 5, and there shouldn't be any covetousness. And you know what covetousness is? We don't talk much about it. We probably should in the United States because materialism is an issue here. Covetousness can be defined as trying to keep up with the Joneses. You ever heard that phrase? That means you want the wealth or the possessions of somebody else, all right? And Paul is saying, don't do that. That's not the way Jesus was. Imitate God. And then in verses 6 and 7, he kind of shores up these points. And then in verse 8 and 9, he transitions away from ethics to a way of living. And he says, walk in a way that exhibits goodness, righteousness, and truth. And then verse 10, try to be pleasing to God. And why? Because that's what Jesus did. That's the way Jesus lived. Now, if you listen to what I just read and what I've just paraphrased, don't be mistaken. The goal of Christianity is not conformity with a series of ethics, but conformity with the character of Jesus. It's the conformity with an image, not conformity with ethics. All ethics are an approximation of what that image looks like. Does that make sense? Paul is describing what it looks like to imitate God. So he gives us some do's and some don'ts and tells us to walk in a certain way. Now, the question that comes to my mind as I read this is this a realistic goal? I mean, imitating God, that is a lofty, lofty goal. But think about who's writing this. The person that's writing this is the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, as some of you know, he was a superstar in the Jewish religion, an up-and-comer, rising fast, but he was not a good dude. And in fact, he had Christians, innocent people, imprisoned, tortured, and killed just because they were Christians and believed differently than he did. And in fact, he then has a miraculous conversion, and even after he's converted, the Christians still didn't want to be around him at first because they were still scared of him. They thought they knew how bad this dude was. They couldn't believe that someone that bad could really change. And then Paul writes in one of his other letters, he describes himself as having been chief amongst all sinners. And yet, he ends up planting churches all throughout the Mediterranean Rim. He risked his life, he's beaten, he's flogged, and he ends up giving his life in martyrdom in order to preach to Nero, to preach the gospel to him. This is a man who was changed. And this is the man who's writing to us, telling us to imitate God, that these things are possible. But we don't have to rely just on him because we can look at Peter too. You all remember Peter? Peter, famous for having denied Jesus 3 times, having denied his Savior 3 times. And then, even after Jesus is resurrected and appears to them, he gives them the Great Commission, go to all the earth, making disciples. And then you look at Acts 10 and 11, and Peter hasn't gone into all the earth. Peter's in Joppa. He's in Joppa at the house of Simon the tanner. And God has to give him a vision of taking the gospel to the Gentiles, and then he has to have a divine appointment with the centurion. All this has to happen before he's willing to go, but then he goes, and he ends up being crucified in Rome. He's martyred. He gives his life for Jesus, and when he's crucified, he insists on not being crucified the way Jesus was, but being crucified upside down because he said he wasn't worthy to die the same way his Savior did. This is the man who had denied Jesus 3 times, but he had changed. And so here's what he writes. He writes in 2 Peter 1:4, he says that he, God, has granted to us precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature. That sounds pretty lofty. Here's the guy who denied Jesus, and he's saying we can become partakers of the divine nature. The same divine nature that God has, we can exhibit that same nature to the world. And then there's Jesus. Sermon on the Mount, maybe his most famous sermon. He gets to the end of it. Remember what he says, Matthew 5:48. He says, you are to be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. In other words, you look at the character of God, you should be able to look at our character, and they should mirror one another. Now, we're going to talk about that in a minute, what that means, but that is the goal. And it's the goal of God to restore the image of God in man, that image that was marred in the fall. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's calling us up to that goal. And this is why sometimes, Cindy knows this about me, probably the rest of you don't know, but I kind of bristle when people say, well, we're just all sinners. Ravi Zacharias, some of you have heard about Ravi Zacharias or Carl Lynch. You talk about these Christian leaders who fall, and then somebody says, well, we're just all sinners. But I don't see Jesus doing that. I see Jesus calling us up to a higher standard. I know some of you just got back from the conference, and I was talking to Henry, and I asked Henry, I said, did you get champed while you were there? And he said, yeah, I got champed. A lot of us got champed. Well, if you know the part of the culture of every nation, we refer to each other as champions. Champ, how you doing this, bro, champ? We're calling you up to a higher calling. Just like Jesus said, you be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect, because you can overcome by the power of the Holy Spirit. That's what Jesus is talking about here. Now, the theological term for what we're discussing here is sanctification. And if you want to know, we're going to talk in a few minutes about putting this in the proper context. But sanctification is the theological term for our being conformed to the image of Jesus. And just so there's no guessing about what his will is for our life, all you have to do is look at 1 Thessalonians 4:3, because this is what it says. It says, this is God's will for you, your sanctification. In other words, there's no getting out of this. Now, I know you all have gotten really quiet here. You've gotten nervous. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can I do this? This is impossible. Hang with me. We're gonna explain this. But this is what God's will for us is. We labor over what God's will is. Lord, have you called me to be an architect, an attorney, a teacher? Lord, who am I supposed to marry? Lord, show me what your will is. Where am I to go? What am I to do? And the Lord says, hold on, start with this. You want to know what my will is? This is my will for you, your sanctification. Number one, my will for you, says the Lord, is that you should be conformed to the image of Jesus. You should be like him. You should manifest his love, his righteousness, his goodness to the world around you. And then Paul, we're going to skip ahead to verse 17. I'm not going to read all the verses. But you get to the end of Paul's description of what this looks like. And here's what Paul says in chapter 5, verse 17 of Ephesians. He says, so then, another like therefore, so then, do not be foolish, don't be a fool, don't be mistaken, but understand what the will of the Lord is. What's the will of the Lord? That you be sanctified. That's what he's been talking about. Now let's put this in context. Some of you have heard, you read in the Bible about this concept called salvation. And here's what you need to understand about salvation. Salvation is a process. It's a process, and it's made up of three different parts of this process. What we call justification, and this is what in the 21st century and 20th century church we refer to as salvation, is the idea of justification. And justification is what we commonly refer to as being born again, saved, converted, seeing the light, praying the sinner's prayer. You do that, you believe on Jesus, and you're saved, you're promised, you're going to go to heaven. You have assurance of salvation, not because you're good, not because you've been conformed to the image of Jesus, not because you're going to during your lifetime, but because you believed on the sacrifice that he made. That's justification. And then at the other end of the spectrum is this idea of glorification. And glorification is what happens when we die. This is, I'll fly away. It's eternity with Jesus. We'll be like him because we'll see him just as he is. We'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye. All of that. This is what happens after we die. We become perfected, glorified. in the image of Jesus and given a glorified body. All the things that don't work right on our bodies, my eyes will be back 20/20. All the other things that are wrong with me will be fixed. This is what happens. This is the promise. But in between all of that, which is what we're to be occupied with here on the earth, is this idea, this process of sanctification, of being conformed to the image of Jesus. And here's the problem, that in the 21st and 20th century church, what we have primarily focused on is justification or glorification. It's either all focused on our salvation, and that's all we talk about, and that's what we sing about, Lord, thank you for saving me, and we focus on that, or we focus on, I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away, Beulah land, all of that, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But the Bible doesn't say all that much about heaven, but instead we focus too much on getting off the earth and not focusing on what we've been called to do here. But it's not always been like this. You can look at different stages in the church. During the Methodist movement, with the Wesleys, they were focused on sanctification. I mean, it was about, the burning of the heart and getting saved, but then it was like, okay, how can I become like Jesus? And that was the real focus. It's not always been the way it is today, and we need to be more focused on what it means to be sanctified. And here's what Jesus said. Jesus said that after talking with his disciples and telling them, look, don't worry about what you're going to eat, where you're going to get money, all these things that the Gentiles worry about, all the things that the people, the unbelievers, what they worry about, don't worry about those things. Instead, seek first the kingdom of God. In other words, seek first the expansion of the kingdom, helping other people get justified, get saved, but also seek his righteousness. In other words, seek to become like Jesus. That's what's supposed to be the primary focus of our life. Now, this idea of sanctification is a process. And everybody starts at different places. It's interesting, and I don't know why it's like this. We can ask Jesus when we get to heaven. But some people, you see them, they get justified, they get born again, and it's like their life changes radically. Everything that was wrong, addictions they're set free from, and it's like they just jump way ahead, Other people, it's kind of a slow burn. It's a process of, they're still not that much different right after they become a Christian, but then they grow, over time. And I want to talk a little bit about that process and how it works. And I want to give you an example. This is an example from about 10 years ago. I was in Palm Springs, and I was there to play golf with a friend of mine, a friend of our ministry. His name is David Houston, and he's our church growth consultant for Every Nation. Does a great job. Most of our churches are growing. He's a great guy. He's also a very good golfer, much better golfer than me, but we sometimes go on these golfing trips. And so we go to Palm Springs, which is out in the desert. This was actually taken at that golf course, palm trees everywhere, mountains in the background, beautiful. And so I'm looking forward to playing this day. Our tee time is at 11:45 a.m., which is not really great because it's right at lunch. I don't do well when I'm hungry. I get hangry, like some of you all, And so right before we tee off, there's a little food hut there at the first tee. I buy a cheeseburger, a big Palm Springs cheeseburger. I love cheeseburgers. I'm a man of simple tastes. And I get this burger, and I put it in the golf cart. I get up on the first tee. I hit my first tee shot right down the center of the fairway. All is good with the world. I then take a bite of my cheeseburger, and I knew immediately it didn't taste right. And I looked at it, and it wasn't just undercooked. It was like not cooked. I mean, it was like cheeseburger tartare. If you know what I'm talking about. Just raw meat. And so now I'm thinking, I'm not going to be able to eat. I'm going to be hungry. It's going to be 2 hours before we get back to this shed get back to this food hut to get some food. This is not going to be good. So I'm already thinking about this. I get up to my second shot. I hit it right of the green. I make a bad chip. I make a bogey. Now, if you're not a golfer, you don't know what a bogey is. Just trust me, bogey's not good. Okay, it's not what you want to make. It's not what the pros make. And so then we go to the second tee, and I get up on the second tee, and it's not level. Okay, and my feet are actually below the level of the ball. And when that happens, what tends to happen is the club face turns over through the swing, and it makes the ball turn left. Now, I know this. I've been playing golf since I'm 12 years old, but I'm still thinking about the burger and the bogey on the first hole. And so I hit this big sweeping hook, turning left over the road out of bounds. Now, that's a two-stroke penalty, and I've got to tee up again from the teeing ground. So now I'm starting to boil a little bit. And I tee up my second shot. I hit it down the fairway. And we've been paired with another couple. And this is what happens at resort courses. You don't get to just play with people you know. They put us with, it's so crowded, they put you with somebody else. And so we're paired with a woman, and I guess it was her husband. And so since I have to hit a second ball, they're ready to go in their cart, and they take off as soon as I hit my ball, and they get down to the balls first. And she stands up and hits her ball right into the water. Now, frankly, I wouldn't care. I didn't really feel sorry for her. I wasn't really paying attention to what she was doing. But she hits her ball in the water, and then I step up to my ball, and I look at my ball, and my ball, it says pro staff on it. Now, this may not mean anything to you, but real golfers, good golfers don't play pro staffs, okay? The professionals don't play pro staffs. Most of them on the tour, they play Titleist Pro V1Xs, and good amateurs play Titleist Pro V1Xs. It's the best ball in golf. It's the most expensive ball in golf, and that's what I was playing. And so I asked her, I said, what ball did you just hit? She said, it was a Titleist, meaning my Titleist. Okay, so now, I'm out $10 in golf balls, out a $10 burger. I'm down $20, and I'm getting ready to be 3 over par. I'm boiling, okay, and I'm hungry, okay? And so I reach over into my golf bag. When she says that, I say, well, don't worry. I kind of mumble, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal, okay? But in my heart, I'm thinking, how can you not know the difference between a scuffed up Pro Staff and a brand new Pro V1X? Okay? Now this, now don't judge me, this is 10 years ago. I don't know, I hope I've progressed. But I'm giving you this as an example of some different stages of sanctification. I think there's really 3 stages, and this is probably an overgeneralization, but let's take, the first stage would be, what I felt in my heart was not love, it wasn't understanding, it wasn't goodness and righteousness, but what if I had just not tried to mask it, right? What if when she said, oh, sorry, I owe you one, I owe you a new ball, what if I'd said, what I really felt was, how can you not tell the difference between a brand new Titleist and a scuffed up ball that nobody who's any good plays, right? That would not have been the thing to do. But that's where a lot of us start, right? We don't even try to mask who we are. Now, most of us, we try to put up the mask because we know that there's a right way to respond to people. And so that's the second stage of sanctification. And that's where I was, right? I mean, I knew I shouldn't feel what I was feeling, and so I masked it. Instead, I said, don't worry about it. But in my heart, that's not really what I was feeling, okay? But you know what? That's not where it stops. There's actually a third stage. And the third stage of sanctification is where you see things the way they really are and you respond the way the Lord would. And what I should have done is I should have seen things the way they really are, which was, this was not a big deal. I was not playing in the U.S. Open. It was just a golf ball, right? And I should have seen it was an honest mistake anybody could make, especially somebody who doesn't play a lot, right? So if I'd been at the third stage of sanctification, it would have been easy because that's what would have been in my heart. It would have taken no effort. I just would have been who I was, right? And that is the goal of sanctification. It's the difference between doing and being. And on this process of sanctification, we go from focusing on doing to hopefully being, because as we become conformed to the image of Jesus, then we don't have to focus so much on doing. All we have to do is act out of who we are, because who we are is the image of Christ, and it's good, and it's love, and it's righteousness. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the goal. And in fact, that's what Jesus said. So in Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is talking about a lot of different things that we're supposed to do, he actually gives a couple examples. And he says, you've heard that you're not supposed to commit adultery. But I'm telling you that even if you lust in your heart after a woman, it's like having committed adultery. And you've heard it said that you shall not murder. But I'm telling you that if you hate your brother in your heart, if in your heart you're saying you're a fool, you're stupid, it's like committing murder. Now, Jesus isn't saying in those scriptures that that's the same thing. Okay? That's the mistake that we make a lot of times. Is we think, oh, well, it's just as bad to hate or to think something bad as it is to commit some bad act. And if you think that's true, if you're married, just ask your wife if she would rather that you commit lust or commit adultery. Okay? They're not the same thing. Now, you shouldn't be doing either, but here's the point. What Jesus is saying is that we're to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. And perfect means that what's on the outside is consistent with what's in your heart. And what's in your heart is good. That's what Jesus was getting at. He's saying, you guys, you're focusing on just doing, on what looks good. And that's right, you shouldn't commit adultery. But I want to go deeper because the image of God in man cuts to the heart. And in the heart of Jesus, in the image of God in man, he does not lust. He does not hate. He does not think that person is stupid, that person's an idiot. That's what it means to be perfect, that the outside and the inside there's a congruency between the two, and that when you're there, you can focus on being and not doing. Now, it's a process, and we're all at different places in this process. And, you think about this, it kind of makes sense. It explains a couple things. Like, have you ever wondered why some people, as they get older, they just tend to get kind of grumpy and gruff and rude, and then there's other people, they just get sweeter. Grandma, maybe she gets sweeter and nicer, and Grandpa, he just gets gruff. You ever wonder about that, why that happens? I think the reason it happens is a couple things. First of all, I've noticed this as I'm getting older, and I should have asked the over 50 crowd last night, and I could have got a consensus probably. But as I get older, I tend to care less what people think about me. I hate to say that. But this is kind of normal, I think. It's natural. And the other thing is, as you get older, you don't have as much energy to put up the mask, to put up the pretense. So what happens is, as people get older, they drop the curtain. And what you see in people's hearts is what was already there and always has been there. This is why people get married and after they get married, they go, this is not the same person I married. Well, actually it is, but they just didn't let you see it. That was always what was in their heart, okay? So how does this process happen? Here's how it happens. It happens as what I like to refer to as a joint venture. Here's what Paul said about it. The same Paul who's telling us that this is possible, here's what he says. He says, work out your salvation. And remember, he's not talking about justification. He's not talking about glorification. Justification is something that's happened in the past. Glorification is something that's going to happen in the future. He says, work out your salvation. He's talking about sanctification. He says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because it's God who is at work in you to accomplish his purposes in you. And we know what his purpose is. His purpose is to conform us to the image of Jesus. So it's this joint venture. It's things that we have to do and things that he does. And you can go into different churches and they focus on different aspects of it. Some churches are just like, well, you don't really need to try because you just need to love Jesus more. If you love him more, he's going to change you, And then other churches are like, no, it's all on what you do. Actually, it's both. It's organic. It's not necessary. It's not transactional. I don't want it to sound like that. It's organic. It's the Holy Spirit working in you. And then what happens is, through the processes of life, through trials and tribulations, the Lord uses these trials and tribulations in order to conform us into the image of God. And this is what's beautiful about the efficiency and the economy of God, is that he uses things that are broken in the world, things that resulted from the fall of man, things like disease and people who are fallen and rude to us and persecute and are mean and insensitive, and disasters, natural disasters. All of these things that are wrong with the world, he uses those like grit on sandpaper in order to mold us and to smooth us out. In other words, he uses what's wrong in the world to make what's wrong in us right. Isn't that brilliant, how God does that? And we kick against these things, right? We think, oh, how can this happen to me? How could God let this happen to me? Well, it's because his will for you is your sanctification. And that's sometimes more important than our happiness or our peacefulness or other things that maybe we value, affluence, wealth, other things that we value over what he values. But what happens is that over time, if you stay in the yoke, you continue to put yourself in front of the Lord. You spend time in the Word. You read the Gospels. You see how Jesus responded to certain situations. You stay in community. You stay in a church when somebody offends you. I walked by Jane. I could barely recognize her because of the mask, but I almost walked by her back there without saying hi to her because I didn't recognize her at first with the mask on. What if she'd gotten offended and said, I'm not going to be in this church anymore because, well, maybe I did offend her. Maybe I've done that before. But maybe what the Lord is doing is using that as an opportunity to teach her or teach other people like how to forgive, right? To become more like Jesus because Jesus suffered indignity and offense, right? This is part of being sanctified. But then over time what happens, hopefully by the end of your life, you're a lot more like Jesus than you were in the beginning. And maybe you're not perfect, but that's still what Jesus calls us up to keep us stretching, to keep us reaching. I like the comparison of beer to wine. I'm not a big beer drinker. The only time I drink beer is like if I have pizza, and I don't know why. There's some reason it kind of goes with pizza or whatever. But, beer, if you wait too long to drink it, it gets old. It's nasty. And, that's why we have this born-on dating that you have with beer now. That's the big thing, right? Because you need to know when was this beer born so you can know before it dies to drink it, But with wine, it's different. With wine, it's very different. With wine, even the most expensive, complex, really fine wine, if you drink it too early, there's a harshness to it. It's still good. You can still taste the flavors. But if you've ever had wine that's really good and old, it's so smooth. It's so smooth. And here's the thing. What Jesus wants is he wants us to be like wine. He's the great vintner. That's why in the wedding at Cana, he turned water into wine, and not just wine, but he turned it into good wine. And that's what he wants to do with us. And you might say, well, why does this matter? Why should I be focused? Why should I be focused on sanctification, becoming like Jesus, being conformed to his image? Here's why it matters. Because what's at stake is the transformation of the world. And some of you have been around here, you've heard me say this before, but it's not our justification that changes the world. Do you realize that? And we talk about getting people saved, and we have to be, because that's the first stage on transformation, personal transformation, sanctification, and all of that. But just because somebody gets born again doesn't mean they're going to have any impact on the world at all. If they don't change, they're not going to change the world around them. Right? Justification is something that's happened in the past, and glorification is something that's going to happen in the future. So your glorification is not going to change the world. What's going to change the world is your sanctification. Because changed people change the world. Here's what Paul said to his disciple Timothy. In Timothy 2:21, he said, "Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from these things, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, and prepared for every good work." The more you are like the master, the more useful you are to the master. Jesus changed the world because he was in the image of God, carried the power of God, but he also was in the image of God. He was God. Imagine what a world would be like filled with people conformed to his image. People who walked in love like Jesus walked and exhibited goodness and righteousness and holiness. And part of the reason why, and the music group can go ahead and come on up. I'm just about finished here. Catching you off guard because I'm not going long today. But you all know why when you hear the word holiness, a lot of you think hypocrisy. It's almost like an offensive word. People don't use the word holiness anymore. And the reason they don't use the word holiness is because when you hear the word holiness, what you're thinking of is stage 2. All right? You're thinking, oh, I know, you're putting up that pretense, but I really know what's in your heart, right? Or maybe you grew up in a Christian family, a Christian home. Your parents said they were Christians, but then, you saw them arguing in front of one another, and they ended up getting divorced. And you think, yeah, you said you were Christians, but you couldn't even live out what you preached, right? You acted one way. You tried to put forth an image, a mask, but in your heart, I know what was really in your heart. And so what we do is we equate holiness or hypocrisy or holiness with that. We think holiness is hypocrisy, but holiness is not stage 2. Holiness is stage 3. All right? And stage 2 is not as bad as it seems. It's better than stage 1. And there's some things that are worse than hypocrisy. I saw a 60 Minutes interview once with Lady Gaga. And she was talking about the fact that she used drugs. And she said, you know, the thing is I use drugs, but the difference between me and all these other Hollywood people is I admit it. So what she was doing was she was saying, I'm authentic. She was elevating authenticity over righteousness. She was tearing down the standard and saying, look, I'm not even going to pretend to live up to it because I don't even think there's a standard. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's worse than stage 2. But stage 2 is not the end. Where we want to be is where Jesus was. We want our hearts to be changed so that they're like Jesus. So it's not an effort in the end to act out righteousness and goodness and love because it's what we have become. So where does all this start? Well, here's what Jesus said. Back to the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, verse 6, he said this. He said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are those who want to get to stage 3. Blessed are those who want to be the same on the inside and the outside and want that to be good. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for that. If you've ever fasted, you know what it's like to be really hungry. Even if you just fast for a day, but if you've ever done fasting for more than a day, like 2 or 3 days, it's all you think about is food, right? I mean, every billboard you see, every advertisement on television, it's all about food. That's all you can think of. And that's all you desire to like the exclusion of everything else. And that's what Jesus is saying right now. He's saying you need to hunger after being conformed to my image. Hunger after the righteousness of God, the way you hunger after food. Thirst after it like you've just worked out. And there's nothing better than a cold bottle of water once you've worked out and you're really thirsty. And that's all you want and that's all you can think about. That's what we're supposed to be focused on. And if you are, here's what he promises. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Isn't that a great promise? You can hunger and thirst after wealth and fine things and nice cars, and you may or may not get that. You know? Who knows? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But here's what Jesus promises, that if you hunger and thirst after being conformed to his image, after having your heart changed into what he expects of you, so that it conforms with the way that you act, you'll be satisfied. That's a promise. That's a prayer he'll answer. Let's pray. Lord, we praise you, first of all, that you are a good God. You are a good Father. You're not the Father that says, do as I say, not as I do. Lord, but you call us to follow in your footsteps. Lord Jesus, you call us to do what you did, and you promised to help us. Lord, you came to restore your image in us, Lord, and we thank you for that. You call us up. You don't allow us to be comfortable, Lord, in who we used to be. But Lord, we thank you also that you don't leave us alone to try to do it in our own strength, Lord, but by the power of your Holy Spirit, Lord, you promise to change us. You promise to convict us, to guide us, and to transform us. Lord, so this morning we pray, Lord, that you would transform us, Lord, into your image so that we can be pleasing to you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.